Hello and welcome to our webcast series from the Conference Board entitled Beyond COVID-19. This is an in-depth view of our world, which is now, as you know, in the grasp of this global pandemic, a deep recession, and growing civil unrest. And if there was ever a time for leadership from the nation's business community, it is now. I'm Steve Odland, CEO of the Conference Board, and joining us in this webcast is Carly Fiorina, the former CEO of Hewlett-Packard, and Dr. Lori Murray, who is president of the Committee for Economic Development, which is the policy center of the Conference Board. Welcome to both of you. Today's webcast is eligible for CPE credits. If we turn to that slide, and we thank you all for tuning in to hear the discussion. All you have to do to earn credit is to provide your name and email in the designated box. Below, click on the 3 pop-ups that will appear, and you will get credit for the attendance of the program. Here to challenges. She's originally from Austin, Texas, graduated from Stanford undergrad, Maryland MBA, MIT Sloan for her MS, and she spent her early career with AT&T before going with Lucent Technologies, which is the spinoff of AT&T. Of course, she's so well known for her time at the Hewlett-Packard Company. She became CEO in 1999, the first outside CEO, and led Hewlett-Packard through some very interesting times. I'm sure she'll mention some of that. She also ran for U.S. Senate in California against Barbara Boxer, and of course we all remember her throughout the presidential debates in the 2015 and 16 Republican nomination for U.S. President. She also has chaired a PAC to recruit women voters entitled Unlocking Potential. It's the Unlocking Potential Project. And she most recently has authored a new book called Find Your Way. She is fully engaged right now as chairman of the Carly Fiorina Enterprises, which counsels companies to create an equitable workplace culture, building high-performance teams, and teaching the fundamentals of leadership, which is the entire focus of our conversation today. And Carly, thank you for joining us, and we're looking forward to your thoughts on all of this. Joining us also is Dr. Lori Esposito Murray. Thank you. And Lori is the president of the Committee for Economic Development and an adjunct senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. She also is a former distinguished national security chair at the U.S. Naval Academy and an adjunct professor at the University of Connecticut, and is president emeritus at the World Affairs Councils of America. Lori has a long, distinguished career. She's been part of several presidential administrations in the areas of chemical weapons and arms control. She served as executive director of the Federal Advisory Committee on Gender Integrated Training in the Military, and began her career working up on the Hill, longtime legislative assistant for Senator Nancy Kassebaum from Kansas. So Dr. Murray received her BA from Yale and PhD from Johns Hopkins. Lori, welcome and thanks for joining us. So, yeah, I think, looking back just a few short weeks ago, I guess it's a couple months, but I don't know many people who predicted this confluence of events, beginning with COVID, and then the death of George Floyd, and now the seismic street protests, which are really driving, I think, a sea change in public consciousness and the issues of racial injustice and social unrest. But the Conference Board is over 100 years old and has been helping the world's leading companies and society at large navigate the crises and develop reasoned solutions for our country. Given the events of the past few weeks, the Conference Board is building on its historical role and launching Building a more civil and just society, a series of CEO forums to foster action. CEOs still remain one of the most trusted groups in America, and their personal and corporate actions have the ability to drive this discussion and inspire change in our country. So with that, Carly, you have been a leader of organizations, through what age, through 9/11,
well, I think it's fair to say, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Iraq War.
Steve,
you are
Lori
uniquely situated to comment on our current situation. But how do you
I think a global
our
pandemic
current situation? How is this different?
We haven't had one for
past
100
situations
years.
through which you've led.
And I think as well, the impact of video of George Floyd's murder on national television has really galvanized a much wider group of citizens all over the world, actually, not just in this country, to stand up against what has been long-standing racial injustice. I think the other thing that's different, honestly, is both the demands on business and the disappointment, if I can use that term, with business. You are correct, absolutely, Steve, in your introduction when you say that business remains one of the most trusted institutions in the world and CEOs are trusted, but it's also true that there is a great deal of data that suggests that trust of business has been declining over the last several years and that it declined further as a result of COVID, with people perhaps believing that businesses put profits ahead of employees' or customers' health. So I think on the one hand, there's an opportunity for business to demonstrate the positive impact that it has in communities and in countries and around the world. At the same time, I think what's different now is the level of political requirement of businesses. 10 years ago, even 6 years ago, I would say, you didn't have customers taking to Twitter to demand certain things of businesses, to demand that businesses drop advertisers, or to demand that businesses drop someone they represented. That's pretty routine nowadays. And so I do think business is in the center of the political conversation, the civil conversation, in a way that was not true 5 or 10 years ago. And I can't hear Steve, so, well, maybe if I can just add while we, oh, good, you're there.
Probably hear me now. Yeah, thanks, sorry. Carly, your comments were spot on, and Lori, as a leader of CED, which is a group of CEOs, you may want to build on that and talk about, some of the challenges that your group has been facing.
Well, in terms of what's different, I absolutely agree with everything Carly had highlighted, and I would just add the component of globalization, and so the rapid pace of the spread of the coronavirus. It has, along with technology in terms of connectedness and spreading information about the killing of George Floyd. You have globalization spreading the disease. And what's fascinating to me is that the last time we had a pandemic was 100 years ago. And part of the reason I believe that it became a pandemic, the Spanish flu became a pandemic 100 years ago, was because of World War I and the military soldiers going back and forth across borders and across countries and coming back home and going back overseas. And you put that on steroids with globalization and travel. It becomes this unknown about this pandemic and this disease, which we're playing catch up to try and figure out what it is. Because it is still an unknown on how to deal with it, and we don't have any vaccines yet or treatments, it provides an overlay of unknown across the whole global economy. And that makes this very, very different. And I think the only way that we're going to deal with this is that if we all work together, on a bipartisan level, business working with the private sector, working with the public sector, and this is the zone that CED is in, the Committee for Economic Development, the Public Policy Center. And we have seen, even though there's been criticism about partisan
yeah, you know, I think your comments are you know, really very interesting as we're trying to get our arms around this, because as you said, it's really an unprecedented time. You know, Carly, you said that those people who are closest to the problem really should understand the problem best. And you know, CEOs have multiple constituents today. There are shareholders, of course, but employees and the public. So I think CEOs are uniquely positioned to be close to these constituents and be close to the folks who are going through this. But how can CEOs stay in touch with what's going on and empower their people to take the right actions through this period of time?
I think that's absolutely true. And a number of the companies that we work with at Carly Fiorina Enterprises, as well as my foundation, are equipping their employees, empowering their employees to connect in community. It is a fact of problem solving, and leadership is all about problem solving, that people closest to the problem do know best how to solve the problem. Unfortunately, sometimes people closest to the problem aren't given the resources or the empowerment to go actually make a positive difference. But I think wise CEOs learned quite some time ago that the more you can decentralize decision-making and creativity and innovation, of course, some things must be left to the C-suite, but a great deal can be pushed out into an organization. And so, for example, some of our partner companies like American Express or Mass Mutual or others are encouraging their employees, and we did this at Hewlett-Packard as well, to reach into communities, to provide resources, but also to reach into communities to build relationships and provide mentoring and support. And I think this is a place where business can have a tremendous impact. Look, every community around the world, and certainly in this country, is struggling. First, struggling with the impact of a pandemic, with economic devastation, and now with civil unrest, and potentially as well the destruction of property. And so this is an environment where help is desperately needed. And yet, the people who understand that community best are the people of that community, in that community. And that includes the employees of companies, the customers of companies, the partners of companies. This is a great opportunity for business not to declare that they're part of the solution, but to demonstrate that they are part of the solution by putting their people at work. And of course, one other thing, and I know the Conference Board has documented this many times, but employees welcome this opportunity. They are looking for this opportunity.
It's always a risk, isn't it, when you're trying to empower people, particularly if you have a large and dispersed workforce like retailers or restaurants where people are out.
People are looking
how do you
for
make
meaning
sure
and
as a
connection
CEO
now, and this is a place
that
where companies can
that
encourage and
the
enable
interactions with your
connection
customers are
for
so aligned
positive
that you're really
impact and
speaking with one
problem-solving.
voice? Right.
Well, of course, there is a risk. On the other hand, businesses take prudent risks all the time. And I think the best defense that a company has against foolish risks is a strong culture. Culture is all about behavior. You know, companies have statements of values on the wall. But the truth is, people don't really read or listen to the talk about values and culture. They watch the walk. How do people actually behave? What's it really like to work around here? And so if a company has a strong culture that focuses on positive impact and values diversity and understands the role of each employee to make things better every day, and as well a culture that has consequences for failure to perform, a culture that lifts up ethical behavior, those kinds of cultures represent real guardrails for employee behavior. You know, someone once asked me what's my definition of values, and values is a politically laden term, and I said values are what guide your behavior when no one is looking and you don't think anyone will.
Lori, you know, CED has always been
a strong
an organization that's
culture,
focused on policy, focused on getting CEOs engaged in the public square, so to speak, but in a non-political fashion. Talk about the role that CED has played over time.
You know, it's interesting, Steve, because it is, CED is different from other business organizations. We're not a lobbying group. We've never been a lobbying group. In 1942, the leading CEOs in the United States came together, about a dozen of them, and recognized that we were at a real transitional phase that needed leadership. And they came together on their own. They were embraced by Franklin Roosevelt, President Roosevelt, but they came together on their own because they saw that the economy had to go through a major transition from a wartime to a peacetime economy, and there were going to be high levels of unemployment, and with the troops coming back home, and how do we address that? And they also recognized that an economic prosperity really required a rules-based international order. And what came out of the founding of CED was that they played a defining role in developing the Marshall Plan for Europe, and as you know, Steve, the first head of CED, Paul Hoffman, who was the CEO of Studebaker, actually went off to Europe to run the Marshall Plan, and they also played a very important role in
so this notion that CEOs should engage is not a new notion. It's been around for a long time, and we've championed it for a long time. Carly, you know, this situation is unique. I guess everyone is, but it's a huge opportunity, isn't it? I mean, so what role can CEOs play in speaking out, and what needs to happen in our society to create a truly just society?
Well, that's obviously a huge question, and the answer is many things. But let me just start with the role of a leader, any leader, but particularly the leader of a business, a chief executive officer. First, as you well know, Steve, people have been talking about what the role of a CEO is for a long time. And the Business Roundtable recently felt the need to clarify that the role of a CEO is about more than maximizing profits or maximizing shareholder return. And I can remember being at a conference, perhaps you were there as well, in the year 2000, where I said, look, the role of a CEO is to balance the requirements of shareholders, employees, customers, and communities. And it's only by balancing those requirements that you actually can produce sustainable shareholder value. And I think we are sitting in a moment where that is so clearly true because the pressures on business, the requirements on business are coming from society at large now. And so business CEOs must play a role. Having said that, let's just back up for a moment and say, what is a leader actually? Because a leader is not defined by their position or their title. Leaders have positions and titles frequently. But it's also true that some people have a position or a title and they aren't leading. So a leader, a CEO who is a leader, is serving. They serve others and they problem solve. They change the order of things for the better. That is a role of a leader. And so a business leader now has an opportunity to serve their constituents, their customers, their employees, their communities of which they are a member, their nation. And they also have an opportunity to change the order of things for the better. I mean, that wonderful history of the role that CEOs played in World War II. Yes, it's hard to get engaged in discussions without it becoming partisan and divisive, but if there was one group that could stand up and say, these are the things that we need to do, and have some credibility in doing it, and then demonstrate, not just talk, but act, I think it is business leaders. So to your point about justice, you know, I'm fond of saying, because I think it's true, that leaders see the truth and speak the truth so they can act on the truth. And one of the things that I think George Floyd's video did is it forced a whole lot of people to see the truth and speak the truth. We in business have an opportunity to demonstrate, not just declare, that we can be part of the solution. Corporate America spends $8 billion a year on diversity and inclusion training. And yet the data hasn't moved very much, which means we're spending a lot of money and we're not really addressing the problem. And I think business now can step up and say, you know what? Diverse teams are better for our bottom line. By the way, the data supports that. Diverse teams are better for our results, for our innovation. They give us broader solution sets. It's not a nice to do, it's a have to do. Civil justice is important for our business, for our employees, for our communities. In other words, I think business now has the opportunity to link social ideals to performance because they are linked.
Yeah, Carly, we're getting a question from one of our audience. How do we find good solutions to our problems when sometimes diversity of opinion is not really valued, and in fact sometimes people are penalized, they can lose their jobs and so forth if something is said that offends somebody? How do you balance all of that in today's world, Carly?
To succeed. Well, yes, that is such a great question. Look, one of the reasons that we haven't made as much progress as we should in building diverse teams is because we are, as human beings, all of us are, most comfortable with people like ourselves. We just are. It's human nature. In other words, it's harder to work with people who are very different from ourselves. And so the result of that is that whoever is at the table tends to stay at the table and bring more of themselves to the table. Those are just facts. Most people aren't bad. There are some people who are really bad, but most people aren't bad. We're just human. And so we have to acknowledge that working with someone different than me is harder. And so a lot of people put it off. Oh, it's hard. You know, when we all are comfortable with each other, we can finish each other's sentences. We know what we're thinking. The conversation flows easily. Yeah. When someone's different, they bring a point of view to the table, and suddenly there's an awkward silence because we never thought about it that way before, or we don't know how to respond. It's a difficult conversation, and yet, being human beings, a neuroscientist would also tell you, we never learn unless we are challenged. In other words, we have to be challenged by new ideas and new perspectives. And so I would just say we must do the hard work of learning how
Yeah,
to
and we
work
have
with
to teach
people who are
tolerance
different than
of
ourselves.
different
This is a
points
lot
of
of the
views,
work that we
and,
do at
that's what
CFE
diversity
and
is all
unlocking
about.
potential for the
Lori, we have
nonprofit
another
world.
question
It
from
is
our
hard
audience
work,
that relates
and
to
the
education.
only reason
CED
we're
has a
going to
very
get to
long
that hard
history
work
in
is
education.
if we
Wouldn't
truly
large
come to
companies benefit
understand
from taking a
that
more active
our
role
performance
in
will
ensuring
be
parity of
better
education
if we do
in
the
these
work.
districts that are underfunded and so forth? Talk about what we've learned at CED about the importance of education and the business leader's role in that.
So in terms of your question about how do you have a just society, and equal opportunity starts with education. And CED has been working on early education for years, even before it became a more popular issue in terms of recognizing the value of starting early in terms of brain development with early education and how that really helps to change, and there's data on this, actually change the projection in terms of where the opportunities lie going forward into adulthood. So it's absolutely fundamental, it's absolutely key, but also I'd like to emphasize that training and training within the company itself and being responsible for the development and training opportunities and upskilling, particularly during these times with not only extreme unemployment, and we see blue-collar workers and workers with less education and women and African Americans being hit the hardest. Training and upskilling, you put on top of that the threat that was there before COVID-19, and Carly, I know this is the centerpiece of what you've been working on, which is the threat of technology and technology on what was.
Yeah, we're going to come back and talk about technology in a moment. Carly, we have another question from our audience that talks about inclusion and diversity in companies that have a large number of employees in hourly positions like manufacturing jobs and so forth. How can a leadership team essentially stay in touch with the hourly workforce, the distributed workforce in distribution centers and in manufacturing plants, and make sure that that diversity and inclusion is exercised, I guess, all the way throughout the workforce?
Well, first, of course, in business, we tend to focus on data, and data is really important here. So companies should, if they are not already, really understand the demographics of their workforce. Do you have a diverse workforce? Where is the workforce diverse? Is all your diversity, as to the point of your question, Steve, clustered in your hourly workforce? And as you move upward in the organization, does it become more homogeneous? That's the case with a whole lot of companies, for example. But you can't start to solve a problem unless you understand the problem. So it's amazing to me how many companies actually still don't collect the data. The data matters. The second thing that I would say is there is nothing that brings a team together faster than working on a problem together. I grew up in manufacturing companies. And I can tell you, when we had a problem, for example, on the manufacturing floor, the best place to go find out what would make that problem better is workers on the manufacturing floor. If you have a problem in customer service, go ask the customer service reps. In other words, assume that your workers who are out there on the front line, whether they're paid hourly or not, assume they understand something about the work that they do. and assume that if there's a problem with that work that they could actually help you solve it. In my experience, teams come together when they're focused on a common problem, they are tied together by a worthy goal. Okay, we want to improve our performance, for example, and where the assumption is every single employee has something to add. They actually have value they can add besides just working on the manufacturing line, for example, although that's real value. And so bring people together to solve
the
a
answer
common
is
problem.
essentially the
And
way
look
to
at the data
involve people in diversity and inclusion is to
sure
include people
that
in the
you
conversation, and that it's
that
just,
you're
it's
actually
common
looking
sense, but it's,
for candidates,
and you're so right that
diverse candidates for
so
every
few
slot,
companies
including
really
in the C-suite,
exercise this.
and
I
that
want to
you
pivot
are
now
going
because
to
it,
places
this
where you're
our
going to find those.
go ahead, Carly. Sorry. Yeah, yeah. Well put. Okay. I want to pivot now because this situation
them in the conversation
States
for the purpose
has
of actually
spilled beyond our
listening
borders
to
and,
what they would do.
You know,
You know,
the
it's
COVID
one thing
crisis,
to
of course,
include
isn't
people and have
a
a
global
listening
crisis
session. It's
that
another
we've all
thing
been
to
managing
include
through.
people in solving a
But
problem.
now with the
So
George Floyd
that's key.
situation and some of the civil and social unrest, that also has spilled over into capitals around the world. Laura, your work has been in national security and international relations. How do you see this period of time being distinctly unique? And you know, to look at it as a glass half full, it's really an opportunity, I think, on a global basis to try to address these problems really in a more inclusive, globally inclusive fashion, isn't it?
Yes, you know, this is a very unique time, and as you know, Carly had pointed out earlier, technology is playing a very important role in connecting people and connecting causes. And you know, what we're seeing happening in terms of the protests overseas, and particularly in Europe, you know, taking London as an example, it was the ability to see what happens to George Floyd. The ability to relate to that in terms of their own lives and what's happening in their own societies, and to come together, connect on a common goal of social justice, social justice in the United States, social justice in their own homes, in their own cities, and in their own countries, and so there's this connectedness, and you know, what's interesting, because we've been talking about diversity and inclusion. In international relations, some of the biggest successes, or every success, is really dependent on making people realize in terms of ending wars or ending conflict, that even though they are may have different backgrounds, different cultures, there's a commonality. And I'll use the example of Northern Ireland. The first step in terms of ending the conflict in Northern Ireland was bringing mothers together from both sides, from Ireland and Northern Ireland, and having their children play soccer together. It was bringing soccer moms together. And so even though they felt so different from each other, different values, different heritage, different prejudices, it was the fact that they were mothers and they had children who played soccer.
Yeah, it's why in sports and especially children's sports have been great at that. It's been great diplomacy over time. Carly, you led, you know, a large global, one of the largest global organizations. Obviously, you had business all over the world. You know, your point of view on this unique period of time and CEO's role, not just in the United States but globally, through this period of time. What do you see as unique now, and what do you see as the opportunity for CEOs outside of our borders?
Well, I want to go all the way back to something that Lori said at the outset about globalization. Obviously, that is a fact of life now. But I think what has happened in the last 10 years in particular, certainly the last 5, on top of globalization, is a realization that we actually are all connected. I mean, truly all connected. And the pandemic has brought that into sharp relief. Technology has connected us, for sure, so that we're all seeing the same images at the same time, roughly. We're all responding to the same crises at the same time. But now COVID brought home to us in such a visceral, physical way that something that happens in a market in China has us all staying home for months. And so there is no getting around the fact now that something that happens that's unfortunate or tragic or unjust or wrong anywhere in our community or in our country or in our world eventually is going to hit us. It's going to bite us. It's just true. And so I think CEOs of big global companies in particular, CEOs are truly the only leaders who are absolutely transnational and global. I'm setting aside for a moment some of the global organizations like WHO, not to diminish them in any way, but sadly, as we know, the United Nations or WHO, these take on political overtones at some point. But CEOs truly are straddling all of these borders, and CEOs are dealing with all of these trends. At Hewlett-Packard, when I was there, we had over 150,000 employees in 186 countries. So we understood what was going on in the world in a way that very few other organizations can. And so all of this is to highlight the fact that in a business, in a global business, employees are experiencing in real time those elements of commonality that Lori just talked about. Yes, I may be German and you may be American and you may be Brazilian, but we're all a member of this company and we're all dealing with the same trends and the same issues at the same time. And I think how business steps up to this moment is going to say a lot about the kind of world we are in 2021 and beyond. If businesses step up and really say, you know what, it is our job to pay as much attention to customers and communities and employees as we do to our investors.
And you mentioned something which is really important,
it is
which
our
is
job to lead the way
requirement to
in
be
terms of problem solving and changing
some of these other organizations are diminished
because
of their their role in the political scene, and that's divisive no matter how you come at it because of the differences of opinion. And I think it does underscore the need for CEOs to engage positively, but to be very cautious of how they do it from a political standpoint. You know, the other question, another question we're getting here is that capitalism is in crisis, and the solutions probably demand that CEOs change the way that they're engaging. I think we've been talking about some of that, but Carly, interested in your thoughts about capitalism in crisis on a global stage. How do you manage with that?
You know, it's interesting. We use the term capitalism to cover a broad spectrum of possibilities. I tend to prefer the term free markets because the truth is our capitalist system is not necessarily a free market. And so people get, I think, understandably confused or critical when they look at certain industries and say, well, actually, that's not free market capitalism. It's a highly regulated industry. You know, I often say, but it comes from the founders of our nation, power concentrated is power abused. It's always true. It's true in business, it's true in government. And I think what's happened to tarnish the reputation of business is that you have many businesses, big businesses, who are using the concentration of power in the capitals of power, whether it's Washington, D.C. or Brussels, to lobby for and achieve regulations that are helpful to them. That's just a fact. Again, leadership is about seeing the truth and speaking the truth so we can act on the truth. There are industries, like the technology industry, for example, that has gathered enormous power, unprecedented power. And there is a real call for some level of regulation and visibility and transparency into some of that power. And so I think business needs to be realistic that one of the reasons, not the only reason, but one of the reasons that capitalism is in crisis is because people have observed the business community using the political system, if I can use that term. I don't mean it pejoratively, but the business community interacting with, relating to the political world in ways that are advantageous
Sustaining Capitalism and the
and so
importance
people
of
say,
CEO
how do you
engagement on the world
justify
stage and in
CEO
all of
pay
these
when
issues.
hourly
Your
workers
comments
are barely getting by?
on the role of
Business
business
has to
leaders
address
and
some of these
the
issues
importance of capitalism.
if it wants to build and retain its credibility.
The importance of capitalism actually demonstrating that it can provide for prosperity for all is absolutely critical. And capitalism and democracy really go hand in hand. It's free markets, the freedom of the individual, and providing prosperity for all. And it's really important in terms of sustaining capitalism. What that means is we have to make sure that we're looking at how capitalism delivers for all Americans and globally as well. And whether you want to call it a new Cold War or a competition, there we are currently, you cannot deny the fact that we are currently in a battle royal globally in terms of two different types of systems. And one is state-controlled markets, authoritarian capitalism, state capitalism versus free market economies and democracy. And how we come out and whether
Lori,
the Chinese recognize that
we're losing you. I don't know.
They actually came out of the Great Recession with a tremendous amount of prestige, given what had happened in terms of markets and the Great Recession.
Okay. Laura, you were breaking up there a little bit. I think we've got some signal issues, but
they are in a battle royal.
Back to a different subject, which is ESG. Which is, we're talking about environmental, social, and governance issues, and particularly trying to CEO's role in dealing with global warming and a lot of these issues. Once the pandemic hit, all of that focus and that momentum that we had seems to have taken a pause. Talk about the importance of picking ESG issues back up and making sure that through this crisis we continue to make progress there.
Well, just on the environmental issue specifically for a moment, I actually think if business will take a slightly longer view, I think the pandemic has heightened people's awareness of human impact on the environment. And so maybe we're not paying a lot of attention to it right now. But I think people all over the world are looking at the videos that show, oh my gosh, how much cleaner is the air over all our cities, and all of the animals are walking around. And so I actually think people are very tuned now to our impact on the environment. I think I would encourage businesses to ask themselves 3 questions as this pandemic continues to rage. You know, a crisis is a terrible thing, but it's also an opportunity. You mentioned this earlier, Steve. It's an opportunity to rethink a lot of things. And so I think businesses ought to be asking themselves 3 questions. Question number 1, what has this crisis given me an opportunity to rethink? I mean, really rethink. One example might be, I'm going to rethink the relationship I have with the communities in which my employees and customers live and work. The second question, what have I learned during this pandemic that I don't want to forget? Well, one of the obvious things we may have learned is actually people can be reasonably productive in a virtual setting. And maybe, given what we've learned about our impact on the environment, maybe we ought to be very creative about whether or not we actually have to put millions of people in cars every single day to go to the office, or whether we can really advance the workplace. It doesn't work for every job, but it works for a lot of jobs. So what can I rethink completely? What have I learned that I want to apply going forward? And then I think the third question is, what are my most important strategic objectives? Now is not the time to abandon those. Now is the time to really double down. So if you thought it was important to be focused on ESG issues before, it's doubly important now. However, because people are strapped right now, revenues are down, costs are up, cash is at a premium, now you have to prioritize incredibly thoughtfully.
I'd like to move to slide 6, if you could put that slide up. You know, if you go back a few months ago, and look at our economy, it was doing terrifically. But if you look at the Conference Board's measure of CEO confidence, it decreased from 43 in the fourth quarter to 36 in the first quarter of 2020. And then the latest survey showed a decline to 34. We have another survey in the field. It'll be interesting to see. But Carly, you know, this is the greatest decline since the 2008 financial crisis. But it was a crisis that was not a financial crisis. It was caused by a deliberate shutdown in order to contain this pandemic. If you were president through this period of time, would you have done anything differently in the management of this crisis?
Yes, I would have. Number one, I think, again, see the truth, speak the truth, so we can act on the truth. If you go back to 2019, there were several, I think 4 to be precise, very clear warnings that a pandemic of this nature was coming in 2019, never mind January of 2020. And so just as it is a CEO's responsibility to prepare for bad times in good times, so it is government's job to prepare for bad times in good times. When the economy is roaring and everything's going great, that's the time to listen to the warning signs and say, you know what, maybe I better husband some cash. You know what, maybe I better have a strategy for dealing with the global pandemic. So be prepared. The second thing I would have done differently is to go to people's strengths. So I said, what do I mean by that? I think we actually have gotten this exactly backwards. People closest to the problem know best how to solve the problem. We put testing and equipment, PPE, ventilators, etc., in the hands of states, and we put handing out money in the hands of the federal government. And I think we've gotten that exactly wrong. I would have preferred had we given states and localities block grants. They clearly needed support, but they are better equipped to say, where should that support go? Is it to a local hospital? Is it to a local restaurant? Is it to a local municipality? The federal government has a hard time figuring that out. But likewise, the federal government has unmatched purchasing power, unmatched distribution power in the world.
Interesting.
And so use that purchasing and distribution
Lori, I want to
power
turn now to our relations
to develop
with China.
a national testing strategy, to deploy that national testing strategy, and to acquire
the tensions between
and
the United States
distribute
and
all of
China
the
are
equipment
probably
that is necessary
at
to both
an all-time
test
high.
and treat.
That started before, of course, the pandemic, but it, given the purported role of China in with the pandemic, it's created even more friction. And this is not only is with the trade, from the trade standpoint, but it's really spilled over across the geopolitical spectrum. What should be the response of companies? How should companies who rely on China or have their supply chain integrated in China, how should they be responding right now? What should we be doing as it relates to our relations with China?
Well, it's interesting, Steve. I think how companies are responding is actually having a very important impact on U.S.-China relations, and the Chinese themselves are responding in a similar fashion as well in terms of the decoupling. And you see American companies recognizing during this pandemic that they really need to look at their supply chains, find reliable supply chains, find diverse supply chains, and we're seeing companies actually questioning their dependence on China because of the pandemic, which is reinforcing a geopolitical policy of the United States to actually pull back in terms of relations. And the downside of all of this is that we have some very difficult years ahead of us in terms of dealing with China, a very powerful nation, second largest economy, projected to be the first in a decade or so. So there are very, very serious problems, and much China, as the powerful nation that it is, has also been investing consistently in its military. So you have geopolitical issues. And so at a time when we need both the private sector and the public sector engaging with.
Yeah, and Carly, also, if you could mention, technology is your forte, and the whole consolidation of the tech sector and the integration of the tech sector's supply chain with China. Take all that on and help us with that.
Can you hear me, Steve?
Well, I think Lori is exactly right. I think companies are rethinking many things with regard to China. I think there was a huge move, as all of your members and both of you know, there was a huge move, particularly in technology, but not solely in technology, to concentrate supply chains. And that advantaged China, and it advantaged technology companies' costs as well. But I think for two reasons, technology companies, but others also now are talking about diversifying supply chains, because all of a sudden, when something like COVID hits and you are too concentrated, the risks are simply too high. So there is a move to diversify supply chains, to design in some redundancy where that was not considered necessary before. The second reason that that's happening, of course, is that all companies, but technology companies in particular, have learned over and over and over and over again that the Chinese actually do steal intellectual property, that there really isn't an opportunity for companies who have invested appropriately with the right Chinese government-approved partner companies, et cetera, that there isn't a sufficient opportunity to make a profit in China after massive investments there. And so I think This is very basic business risk assessment that says a concentrated supply chain is now too risky. I need to diversify. I need to protect my intellectual property more effectively. And after many years of investment and partnering with the right companies,
Carly,
I'm not making the
your
profit I
organization,
expected to,
Carly
so
Fiorina Enterprises, you provide your clients with a broad range of services, including leadership development, to diversity, inclusion training, effective communications, goals, and so forth. Wrap this all up for us. We've talked about the crisis, the pandemic, the social stresses that we're feeling as a society, both at home and now globally. What are you telling your clients? How are you coaching the C-suites today to handle and deal with all of this?
Well, let's go back to the beginning, perhaps, and focus on what leadership actually is. It's not position, it's not title, it's not how much money you make, it's not how big your office is. A leader serves others. A leader solves problems. A leader changes the order of things for the better. It's so basic, but it's so fundamental. And I start with that because when times are good and everybody's flying high, and everyone's business is going well, we get very confused about leadership. And we think, well, somebody's rich, they're a leader, or somebody's famous, they're a leader, or somebody has a great office or the big title, they're a leader. And then times get tough, and all of a sudden, leadership is revealed, just like character is revealed in tough times. And so let's start with the fact that we need more leaders. So one of the things that we do very fundamentally is say, businesses should be encouraging leaders wherever they are in a business, because we've got a lot of problems, and we need more people who are focused on solving problems and on making things better and on collaborating with others. Business has an incredible opportunity here to lead. If you look at the public's trust in all kinds of institutions, the public's trust has been diminished over the last decade. Certainly politics has turned into this sort of win-lose worldwide wrestling kind of sport, and so people are very hesitant about politics. But every institution, the trust has been diminished, and that is true of business as well, but not by as much. And business touches everyone. Business is focused on data and fact and progress and making things better. And those are the kinds of skills and disciplines that we need more of now. And so what I would say to every business is encourage all of your employees to become leaders wherever they are, on the factory floor, in their community. Enable that with a strong culture. And CEOs can change the order of things.
Carly, that'll have to be the last word. Thank you to both Carly Fiorina and Lori Murray for joining us today. Join us for our next webcast on Beyond COVID. We've got several scheduled. You can see them on our website. You should be able to see them on the screen. Marketing and Communications Watch with Clorox CEO Ben O'Dorer, Comp and Benefits in the Post-COVID World, Global Horizons View in this post-COVID world. And all of that is available on our website, www.conferenceboard.org/COVID-19. I'd like to thank everybody for participating today. And again, thank you to Carly and to Lori. I'm Steve Odland, CEO of the Conference Board.